Today we're going to walk you through the basics of getting started on building your own self-authored assessment. You start by clicking on the Authoring and Assessments. A new window should launch, so if you have any pop-ups, make sure those are disabled. And you would see a blank screen typically, but I have quite a few tests already created. You click on the green Create Assessment. If you have a bunch created, you can copy from an existing one, but we're going to build one from scratch. We'll call this Scratch. You can add a description. I'm not super creative. You can change the language if you speak French. My native tongue is English, so I'm going to enter this as English. And then it brings you up a palette to create your assessment. It's divided into questions, scores, demographics, and reports. And there's a handy feature here to tell you suggestions if you're making a mistake when building the test. It's not an error, it's just a hint. Section 1 has no questions and the assessment has no scores. Not much of an assessment right now, so we appreciate the suggestion. We can build a radio item. Click on a radio item, say what is the capital of the US? And this item has correctness, so we would establish which one is the correct answer. Let's say we say Denver, Washington, D.C., my hometown, which is Indianapolis, and New York. We can establish the correct answer by clicking on this column. Not all questions have a correct answer, so it's optional. And we can give it a point value. Usually it's a 0 and 1 concept, but you can put any value in there you want. These export values are used in data exporting when you're doing macro level reporting. You can change the format of that. If I want to make it a drop down, a checkbox, or something else, I can do that. I can always delete an option if I don't want that by clicking delete selected. And then, oops, I made a mistake. I really did want that in. Just hit the add answer. So you can add as many as you want. Put New York back in. When I hit finish, it's intended to be a what you see is what you get, or WYSIWYG editor. So I can edit from here by hovering over this. But this is roughly what it should look like. And over on the right hand side, this is where we can change formatting options. I want the responses to be in 4 columns. I want this to be left question and answer right, and I want to change the width of the question. Usually it's vertical, usually it's 1 column. You can require the answer, make sure it has a mobile responsive design as part of it. And then I can either save the test, which we'll hold off on, or I can view it in real time. So I've actually created my first test. It only has 1 question, but you can see you can interact with this test. As an author, you have some options here. Maybe you want to display the point values and the correct answer because you're doing some quality assurance. You can do that and close the window so that the test shows you the point values at all times, or you can look at it in different computer-sized formats. It is all mobile responsive, so if I drag it down to the mobile size, it makes it easier to interact with as a mobile test taker. And that's just a little bit about viewing and creating your first question. You can hit the copy and get 7 or 10 questions just to make it fun, but there are a lot of different question types: sorts, checkboxes, rating, ranking, video, audio. So play with some of these different item types. So we've made our first question. Let's make our first score. If we had a bunch of items, we might be building out formulas and conditionals and rank questions. But when we only have 1 question, we're probably just going to create a simple counter. So we'll say this is a raw score. It's going to decide if I get questions right or wrong. And I'll go ahead and copy that in. I'm going to round this raw score to the 2 decimal places. And over on the right-hand side again, that's where you put the questions into this raw score. So maybe your raw score is only for the first 10 questions, and you have an overall raw score for all 50 of the questions you create. That's when you select the questions over here on the right. So I've created my first test with a question, with a score. You can add demographics, ask the gender, the age, things like that, viewed by administrator, viewed by candidate. We'll skip over that, but it's a lot like creating questions. They just happen to be demographics on the test taker. Building your own report is an interesting and easy exercise as well. The system can provide you out-of-box reports here. We have 3 out-of-box reports that mostly just display the data. If you want to get creative, you can create your own custom report. Maybe I want a thin page border around that in blue. Hit finish. And then you can put really anything you want in that report. I can make charts, I can make narrative maps, I can put content in. Very common, I'll do a simple example. I want to display that raw score we created. Your raw score on this test was ... And then you can use the tokens. There's first name, last name, assessment name, date completed, etc., etc. And we created a score down here called raw score. So the system creates a nice token for us so we can report on that. So the text will come out in the format that we created. I have a content box. Your raw score was this. That may be interesting. Perhaps they want to create a bar chart and we want to add that raw score in here. Not super creative, but I'm just trying to show you the different options here. We could create, let's say we want it to be red, and we're going to be really tricky, and we're going to make it a red to a red, and we're going to use a left to right gradient. When we hit finish, we now have another way of displaying that score. But I kind of wanted it in 2 rows, so I could click that second row, and then you can drag and drop these items around. So I'll drag that down there. And you've built your first report. You can view that report just like the eyeball up here. You can click on that. The system will allow you to generate some random values. Let's generate a random value. See what that report looks like. So without any IT expertise, you've just built your first test. Your raw score on this test was 53, and here's what that graph looks like. We didn't spend any time formatting that graph or doing any of those exercises, so you can make it look really nice and professional from there. But the basics of this are build your questions, build your scores, demographics, and build a report. Finally, you can save that by clicking on Save, and we can view this process go all the way through. If you want to publish the test to production, you would click Publish, and in your client, that test would be available. There's always help here on the right-hand side, and it explains each of the features. But the simplest thing is left-hand side is content, center is your palette, right-hand side is formatting. Let's go ahead and click on this test and see it from start to finish. So we took a single question test. Let's get it right. We were in Washington, D.C. It asks if we're finished. And the preview completed page tells you a lot about that test. You got a value of 1 on your raw score. You got a question correct. Here's how much time it took you, etc., etc. And you can click on your report that you built to show your score. So you got a 1 on this test, kind of did what you asked it to do. So in a nutshell, that's creating a test from start to finish. If you have any questions, there should be additional help menus as well as videos you can check out on more specific features.